So I wanted to kind of jump in here and share some things with you. God bless you. I hope that you are doing well. And I wanted to kind of jump in and share this with you. So I've been having a chance to read quite a bit about the 26th dynasty, and to talk a little bit about them is a pleasure. You know what I mean? As I start to read and just dig more and more into history, into our history, there's so many fascinating things you can learn about them. And the 26th dynasty is one of those dynasties, one that's not talked about a lot, and two, when you read about them, you start to dig into the archaeology and the records surrounding their reign. You find out a lot of interesting things about history. You know, there's so many things we just leave out of history because, I don't know, we don't have the time, we say, or we just kind of gloss over. This is one of the dynasties that's important to take a look at. So I wanted to kind of jump in. I want to say thank you for all those who are supporting, and even some folks asked for my Cash App and things like that. I so much appreciate that you asked to make donations. I'll put that down below, probably in the description. I very much appreciate you asking for that. But it's red and black ink, so I will put that down below. You will be able to see it on Danita Smith on Cash App. But I very much appreciate you guys asking for that, and I thank you so much for that. I want to kind of jump into this and to talk about the 26th dynasty and kind of dig into it a little bit. And I'm going to go through a resource here. You guys know I love to go through resources, and I like to write. So I'm a writer. So I love to talk. I also like to write. I like to share as well. So I'm going to be going through this resource that kind of walks us through some things with respect to the 26th dynasty to give us some background. But when you think about the 26th dynasty, as we start to talk about them, you really can't think about them and talk about them without really talking about and thinking about really the Assyrian Empire. I mean, it's really hard to talk about the 26th dynasty because they're really set up by the Assyrian Empire, and it gives you an interplay of all these things going on in ancient Kemet at this time in the 8th century BC and the 7th and 6th century BC. It becomes an important thing because I think so many times we talk about them, we don't talk about the international nature of ancient Kemet. And this dynasty, the 26th dynasty, is one of those dynasties that really brings about the internationalization and international nature of ancient Kemet, and lets you know how many different people were working with one another and interacting with one another. And you have people from the 26th dynasty and things that they've done, mentioned obviously in the Bible, and just various things are there, but they're there in a way that we should know about it. And I think it offers us a view into history. It's almost like taking a little bit of a magnifying glass, if you will, and being able to look into history. So I'm going to jump into that and start talking about that now as we kind of jump into talk about and see some of the faces from people. And this is a sarcophagus, by the way, of a man in the 26th dynasty. But we're going to talk about it now as we kind of jump into it, because it becomes a fascinating piece of history. Because as I read more about this, and I started to read more and more about it, it was hard not to really try to get a good understanding of what the Assyrian Empire was like. Because the Assyrian Empire is the empire that set up the 26th dynasty in ancient Kemet. And I'm going to tell you why and tell you how in just a minute as we go through this. And when you think about that, you have to also talk about the Kushite dynasty. You have to talk about the Kushite people, and you have to talk about Taharqa, because that's all part of the transition and what happens when the Assyrian Empire, if you will, kind of comes onto the world stage in this Neo-Assyrian time period and really starts to push its way around, really start to do things in a very brutal and dictatorial way, which is one of the ways why they got their position in the empire the way they did. So as we talk about this, we're really talking about like the 8th century BC, the 7th century BC. As you start to think about, and this is after the time of, God bless you, thank you so much for joining. This is after the time of the New Kingdom. So the Old Kingdom is past, that's 3000 BC and thereabouts. The Middle Kingdom is past, the New Kingdom is past, and we're in kind of the late period, what they call the late period, if you will. So this is around the 8th or 7th century BC. And when you start to think about this, you look at this, there's something that happens right along this time and around the 8th and 7th century BC. And some people look at the 26th dynasty as starting around 688, which is kind of a little early for me, and going to 525 BC. But what happens with respect to that is, let's go back a little bit before that. Let's go to 701 BC. And we were talking about King Taharqa a couple of days ago, a short time ago. And King Taharqa, as you know, at the time, around 701 BC, he wasn't in charge of Kemet yet. He wasn't in charge of Kush in Kemet. He wasn't in charge of his dynasty and his family's kingdom, which included all of Kush, all of Upper and Lower Kemet, and all of Upper and Lower Nubia. He was head of the army. And at about 701 BC, as we mentioned, and you can look at this in 2 Kings 19:9, about 701 BC, the Assyrian army on the Sennacherib was basically surrounding Jerusalem. And this is an interesting thing, just to give you some background around what the Assyrians were doing, because before this 701 BC, another Assyrian army under another king had surrounded and taken parts of Israel. And as you know, if you look at the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah, they were two separate kingdoms. After King Solomon died, there was a faction, there was a split in the country of Israel, if you will, in the kingdom of Israel. There was a split, and 10 tribes went kind of in the north, and they had their home and their capital, the center of their country, if you will, was in Samaria, what is present day the West Bank in Palestine. It is present day the West Bank. And then the other tribes, the remaining tribes, were in Judah, and they had their capital as Jerusalem, and that's south of the West Bank, where that is today in Israel. So those two kingdoms split, and both of those kingdoms were attacked by the Assyrian army. And the Assyrian army first attacked Israel, and they were attacking all over. So this wasn't just a special thing for Israel. They were attacking all over this whole area that people call the Levant. So whether you're talking about modern day Syria or Turkey or Palestine, Iraq, this whole area, in particular, the Assyrian army's center of control was in what is today Iraq. So northern Iraq and eventually southern Iraq, they had a power play with them and eventually the Babylonians. And this went on for years and years and years. But at this time, in the very late 8th century BC, around 701 BC, they were kicking butt. The Assyrian Empire was all over the place. And 2 decades early, they had taken Israel. They had taken the capital of Israel, which was Samaria, as the two factions, if you will, split up. Israel split into two, as I mentioned. They took the northern part and they literally, destroyed the city, took away thousands of people. They put them in various places throughout the Assyrian Empire. Really, that was their way of scattering people when they conquered a place, and they thought they might revolt again. They would take them. They would take all the artisans, the leaders, the elite people, and anybody they thought they could. They would take them and they would spread them throughout the Assyrian Empire. And then they would bring in their own leaders, their own governors and officials and people to handle business. They brought those in to be in control, and they left the people who were there in place to do agricultural work and things like that, because you needed workers to do that. And that way, they just basically absorbed a large part, huge chunk of the Israeli people. Right? A lot of times people will talk about who's who. This area is so integrated. It's so mixed and integrated and interconnected that it's hard to say. There are people who are probably of Jewish descent who are not even identified, who are not of Jewish descent now. They may not even look at themselves that way, and they may not be living in Israel, but they may be living in that area because their family was a part of that family and those thousands of people that were taken from Samaria and Israel and basically absorbed into the Assyrian Empire. And that happened around 722 BC or thereabouts, right? And so this happened in many places in this whole area. It wasn't just Israel. It happened in many places, and it happened in other cities, not just Samaria that was a part of Israel. It happened there as well. So when 701 BC comes about, you have the Assyrian army there. Now they're at Jerusalem. And Judah, the kingdom of Judah, right? The Lion of Judah, you think of the tribe of Judah. Judah had several cities. It wasn't just Jerusalem. There were other cities that were part of the kingdom of Judah, if you will. And the Assyrian army was coming, and they were basically just taking over. They were killing people, and they killed people viciously. I mean, at this time, the Assyrian army is using iron in a way and manufacturing iron in a way and using it in warfare in ways that other people weren't. They were having a long-standing professional army, and they were willing to be brutal. They were willing to go there. They were willing to be brutal to win. So they would do, sieges that would last for years. They would kill people in very torturous ways, and they were serious about it. So when they came to surround and attack Jerusalem, there's a whole lot of interactions, and we talk about this in the last video, one of the last videos. King Taharqa comes. There are a lot of things that happen as they're surrounding Jerusalem, but one of the things that happens is that King Taharqa comes to face the Assyrian army as they are surrounding Jerusalem. And the story goes, some of the annals of Sennacherib, as well as some of the other things that they've seen, indicates that maybe there were two separate battles. Maybe there was one battle that took place before the account that's mentioned in the Bible, and then another attack, if you will, by King Taharqa coming to face the Assyrian army. We know it took place. It's mentioned in the Bible. It's also mentioned in the annals of Sennacherib. So he mentions that in his annals as he talks about it. This particular resource will tell you, but you can read that. Daniel David Luckenbill talks about it, and he translates it, and you can look at it. And that prism is now held in a museum in America. I believe it's in the University of Chicago. And he talks about their meeting Taharqa several times in battle. And so King Taharqa comes, and, many people believe that it was King Taharqa's army, the Kushite army and the Kemetic army, that helped to take Syria's attention away from Jerusalem. Some people obviously would believe it's a miraculous thing, but though whatever happened, those events took place. And Taharqa faced the king of Assyria in battle in the Levant. As you approach Jerusalem, he faced him in battle, and we know they had a fight there. So what would happen, and what does this all mean, and how does this relate to the 26th dynasty, right? When you start to look at the 26th dynasty, as the 26th dynasty is kind of moving on, before they're even kind of set up, and you know that King Taharqa's father, Psamtik, and his predecessors had already taken over the northern part of ancient Kemet, as well as the southern part of ancient Kemet, so they were in control. And as the Assyrian army continued to move forward, and there were changes, because if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. There were all kinds of changes and attacks and coups that took place in the Assyrian army, if you will. When the son of Sennacherib, the person who was surrounding Jerusalem, when the son of Zechariah came into power, he came to attack Egypt. He came to Kemet to face Taharqa, and Taharqa was still in power. So you talk about maybe around 671 BC. He came to attack Kemet. And so here you have a situation where King Taharqa ruled for years. God bless you, Team Z, Pan-African Designs up here. God bless you. Get the fist up for that too. God bless you. There were no Israelis back, the only Israelites. Okay, all right. God bless you. Thank you so much for sharing. Appreciate your comments. I think your comments down there. So as you think about this, so the king of Assyria, the new king of Assyria, comes to Kemet to fight Taharqa, and he wants to take the northern part of Kemet away from Taharqa. Everybody wanted Kemet. Everybody wanted this area. He comes to fight Taharqa. So this will be the second or third time Taharqa's army is interacting with, more than once, interacting with the Assyrian army. And when he comes this time to Kemet, he beats Taharqa, and he pushes Taharqa from the northern part of Kemet down farther south. And when he does that, he implements new governors. He puts people in place, just like he did in other places, people in place to rule the northern part of Kemet. And some of the people he put in place were part of the 26th dynasty. So that's exactly where you start to begin to see the beginnings of the 26th dynasty, as when he's fighting Taharqa and he's coming to ancient Kemet to do that. This gentleman here, Issachar, he is the king, if you will, of Assyria at the time, who comes in 671 to fight Taharqa. And when he does it, when he beats Taharqa and he pushes him farther south in Kemet, he begins to set up the 26th dynasty. And so the 26th dynasty becomes, the beginnings of it becomes really like kind of servants and puppets for the Assyrian army and the Assyrian Empire. And a lot of people will call them the puppet empire. But as you start to read about it, I have a different appreciation for them as I read the records, because it wasn't an easy decision and an easy thing they went through when they faced the Assyrian Empire. So you essentially have Issachar, one of the Assyrian kings, now setting up these puppet governments, these puppet people, if you will, in Kemet, especially in the northern part of Kemet, because King Taharqa still controlled the southern areas. And the northern areas were really, close to the Mediterranean. They're along the Mediterranean and part of their trade route. So the Assyrian government is now in charge of the northern part of Kemet. And, you start to look at it, he starts to put his own people in charge. And just to give you an idea of some of the people and the names of the kings of the 26th dynasty, you can see right here, you see this Nekaba. I'm not sure, that's exactly the 26th dynasty, but, he's a part of the line. Necho was the first one to set up. So you see Necho there from 672 to 664, Psamtik and Psamtik II. And this is one of the Psamtiks right here. You have Apries, Amasis, and Psamtik III. You begin to see these are the names, if you will, of the people who were part of the 26th dynasty. And Amasis, by the way, that's Amasis right there. That is a depiction of Amasis, who's one of the kings of the 26th dynasty. So you start to see there's a relationship here. There's interactions. Different people. They're different looking people, right? A lot of times when they show you these things in ancient Kemet or they show you this history, they just skip over all this. And we know there were other people in ancient Kemet, obviously, who were black and who were people who were there from the very beginning. But it's just interesting to me that we have all these depictions of the 26th dynasty and we never show them. Right? It's not like there was just one or two people, or just the 25th dynasty that people like to call, who were Kushites in the dynasty of their own, were the only people who were black in all of Kemet. Like, that's what they make you think. And we know that's not the case. This is Africa. This is Northeast Africa. This place is there. And when you read the records, you find that there's interaction and intersection, and there's wars, and there are prisoners of wars are taken all throughout Kemet's history. And there's all kinds of mixing. There's all kinds of things that take place. But when you look at it, there were people who look like him. They look like him. And we don't show it and we don't talk about that. And so it becomes very fascinating to me to look at the 26 dynasty and to see what's happening, because as you're looking at them, it's a diverse dynasty. They're showing a lot about in terms of the interactions of what's happening in the world, or that part of the world, because there are people in other parts of the world, what's happening in that part of the world at that time. And at this time, the Assyrian army is just killing a lot of people. They're killing a lot of people, and they're using the most brutal tactics to make sure they stay in charge. They're not just, just coming and knocking on people's door and shaking people's hand. They're using very brutal tactics and weapons of war that are harder, if you will, more sustainable in battle than other people are using. And they're killing a lot of people to do that. And so as they are setting up ancient Kemet, they're using the 26th dynasty to be their puppets, if you will, in the northern part of Kemet to control this very important area that they want to have control of, this whole Mediterranean area, if you will. They want to have control of that, and they're using the 26th dynasty to do that. So as they do that, it becomes very important. God bless you. I hope that you're having a good one. God bless you, Ray Black. I hope you're having a good one. God bless you. As they do that, as they start to do that, you start to think, wow. This gentleman comes in, this king of Assyria comes in, Esarhaddon, he comes in, he beats King Taharqa in a battle, he pushes King Taharqa farther south, and he sets up his own government. And I start to go, wow, okay, you might think that's the end of the story. And a lot of times when people tell it, that's how they tell it. Like, that's the end of the story. Taharqa went back and, nothing else. And he fought Taharqa, and he took some of Taharqa's family members back with him to Assyria. So you had Kushite people taken as a part of this initial battle in 671, taken back to Assyria and assimilated, like brought within the court, done with as they would do with other royal families that they would take and bring into their Assyrian empire, into their home, so to speak. So you had that happen to some Kushite people who were part of Taharqa's family and a part of his court. So as you do that, you're thinking, wow, this is happening. But when you do this, it's not over. The whole thing is not over. King Taharqa would come back again. So he was not a person who was easily, dissuaded. And that's one of the reasons why I think when you read about him, even if you read in Strabo's geographies, and I know some of you have mentioned that down below, Strabo mentions in his geographies about Turco. He calls him Tirco, Tearco. That's how it was translated. And he talks about Tirco as among the great travelers and the great explorers, if you will, and people who did expeditions in very far places. And he names Europe as in places like that as one of the places Taharqa went. When you look at ancient people talk about Taharqa, King Taharqa of the Kushite dynasty, as being a significant person, somebody who gained a lot of respect in his life. So when he was defeated by Esarhaddon that first time, he came back. He didn't just walk away. He came back, and he would come back in 669, and he would take over the northern part again. Nobody ever tells you that. They don't talk about that. They just make it seem like he got beaten. That was it. He didn't do that. He came back and he took over the northern part again. And as he's taken over the northern part, he's going to face another battle, obviously, from the Assyrians, right? And it's interesting, the people who were part of this 26th dynasty start to like Taharqa. They start to want to be a part of his organization and on his side as opposed to the Assyrians. And I'll show you why in just a second. They start to really gravitate around him. So he comes back and he's prepared. He's expecting the Assyrians to come. And when he comes back in 669 and takes over Harkhebit, Memphis again, when he takes them over, this time, he is kind of waiting for him. And when he takes him over, he's there and he is expecting there to be a fight. Right. And as you think about that, you start to have a situation where there were messengers and people who were kind of, strategically placed by the Assyrian government who will come and do speedy deliveries, if you will, as speedily as you can back in those days, and deliver a message to the king of Assyria that, hey, now Taharqa's back, and Taharqa's taken over Memphis. He's taken over the whole area. He's back. And so the new king at this time is going to be Ashurbanipal. He is the son of the previous king, and he's around from like 669 to 663. He's coming back now. And the interesting part about it, his father dies probably on the way to meet King Taharqa in another battle. His father dies. And so the new king, this is the third king, if you will now, a third king really that King Taharqa is looking at, a third king that's a part of this whole area that King Taharqa is dealing with, that comes in now. And Ashurbanipal comes in, and he is, his father probably died on the way to meet Taharqa to fight him. So it threw a monkey wrench in Ashurbanipal's plan. He's now king. And it says in the annals, and you can read, there is something called the annals or in the records, in ancient records of Assyria and Babylonia. And you can see that, and I'm going to read some things with respect to that. And, and it talks a little bit about, I'm going to try to make this bigger So you can see it. And he talks about here, Assurbanipal is talking about coming to ancient Kemet. He's talking about coming to ancient Kemet, and that there were kings and people whom his father had installed in Egypt. So he's talking about, and this is something that Daniel Luckenbill, I put the reference down below, translated back in 1927. So this is a piece of work that was looking at various records in Babylonia, from Babylonia, as well as from ancient Assyria. And it's fast. When you read it, you start to get a different perspective of history than if you only just read one thing, or if you only just read one person's interpretation of it. You can start to put your own pieces together. So this is Luckenbill, and he is translating these documents where Assurbanipal is talking about coming back to Kemet to fight Taharqa again. And he talks about my father had put certain people who he put in government, right? He put those people in charge, and essentially those people deserted. That, and here they say Taharqa, Tarku, they called him by various names, but this is King Taharqa that they're talking about. That when King Taharqa started to come back, this is in 669, when King Taharqa starts to come back and to take over again, the people who were in charge, that the Assyrian people had put in charge, ran. They were kind of scared, like, we don't want to be a part of this fight. Like, wait a minute, King Taharqa, you're here? Okay, you can have it. You can have the area. We know the Assyrians are coming. We're going. So they left, and they kind of got scared, if you will. And when they left, they were like, yipes, because the Assyrian army was going to kill people in very brutal ways that did not take their oath to them seriously and broke their oath in some kind of way. So many of these leaders that the Assyrian army, both Assurbanipal and his dad, put in place, they had to make a vow. Apparently they made an oath, not just in front of the king, but to their gods, to the Assyrian gods. And so if you broke that oath to turn against their gods, it was like you were not breaking an oath to me, you were breaking an oath to their gods, and they punished you vehemently they punished you horribly if you did that. So the people, the vassals, the puppet government, if you will, that was in charge of ancient Kemet, that the Assyrians had put in charge, which was the 26th dynasty, many of those whole areas, that the whole area really left. I mean, it wasn't just the people in Sais where the 26th dynasty was centered. That whole area of the Delta, they left, because this was about to be a fight again between King Taharqa and the Assyrian army. And what would happen, and Assurbanipal would come, and he would come in, and he would fight a lot of people. He would come in, and this time he fights King Taharqa again, and he beats him. And it's a fight. It's not an easy fight, but you end up having this fight take place. And King Taharqa has a heart. He's not a man apparently who's scared. He has a heart. And, a lot of times you will read these things and they'll be very kind of boastful, and they'll say, they ran for their lives, or they got wounded 5 times by an arrow and things like that. But here's a man who stood and fought various parts of the Assyrian army and lived to tell about it. He got wounded in battle. He came to fight even after they took his family. He came back and wanted more. And he was somebody who, a lot of people who fought the Assyrians back in 600 or so BC and 700 or so BC, they did not live to tell about it. And if you were captured, you were killed horribly. King Taharqa was never captured. And he was somebody who came back in time and time again to face them. But at this point in time, when Assurbanipal comes in about 669 BC to face off against Taharqa, he wins, right? He wins. And what happens, he sets up his puppet government again. And he said, look, you guys basically, all you guys ran. You were scared of this Taharqa. You were scared to fight. I told you to stay. I had my army here. You guys ran. He brought them all back in, all the leaders that his dad had put in place, and he put them back in their positions, right? I guess he didn't have other people to replace them. He put them back in their positions. And then a very interesting thing is mentioned here in these annals here. It's mentioned, he says, the people who were now the people that were being put back in place, and the king of Assyria had gone back to Nineveh, and he had his army in place and his rulers in place. A lot of these people who are the puppet governments, they stop and say, wait a minute, they're trying to drive Taharqa out of Kemet now. Why should we stay here? And then they start to talk about King Taharqa, the Ethiopian, and he sent couriers for the purpose of swearing fealty. And they say, let a treaty be established between us. Let us be of help to one another. Let us divide the land into 2 parts, and let no other person be Lord among us. Let nobody else rule among us. So these were the people in northern Kemet, some of the remnants of what will become what was the 26th dynasty, and all those other rulers that were there. They were making an overture. They were reaching out the hand, if you will, and offering to develop a pact with King Taharqa and say, look, we like you better. We don't want this foreign ruler to be ruling over us. We would rather be with you. We would rather, let us join together. Let us be in a situation where nobody else will be lord over us. Let us not divide our land. Let us work, and don't be divided in 2 parts where you're in the southern part and we're in the north. Let's not do that the way it was before. Let's work together and don't let anybody rule over us. Now, here again, a lot of people want to make you think that the Kushite people were somehow, foreigners in ancient Kemet, that they were well, when you look at the documents, you don't see the people, either when Psamtik or Kashta, Psamtik's father, comes in and takes over the southern part of Kemet, you don't see them being treated like foreigners. And even in this point in time, at the dawn of the 26th dynasty, here are people in northern Kemet reaching out to Taharqa saying, wait a minute, we don't want these people who are going to kill us, be over us. We don't want them to be ruled. We don't want to have two lands. Why should we be separated? Let's be together. Here again, you have people from ancient Kemet reaching out to one another, reaching out to Kushite people and saying, let's have a treaty. Let's join hands together. Let's fight these people. So I want to point that out because a lot of people want to separate the Kushite people and make them separate from the Kemetic people and that they were so different or that's not what the records say. And that's not what they said. Here they are asking Taharqa, let's be together and let's not be divided. Let's not let our land be into two parts. Let's get together and let no one be lord over us. Let's have a pact together. Now, what happened with this is the king of Assyria found out. The king of Assyria found out about this pact that was being done. Yeah, God bless you. The king of Assyria found out about this pact that was being done and what was being said, and this was not going to be pretty for some people. King Taharqa would live because he could fight, but this was not going to be pretty for the people who were reaching out. So what happened is, you always have kind of people who are tattletales, right? The people the people who were basically, spies or lookouts or the informants and the people that the king of Assyria had in place. And since he had beaten Taharqa and pushed them back farther south, he had in place and he reinstated these people who were rulers under his father and who had scattered and were afraid of the fight. He put them back in place. And then he found out from a messenger, from like a spy, if you will, that they were looking to join back up with Taharqa. And the king of Assyria said, okay, we're going to fix that. We're going to deal with that. Just kind of to kind of give you, let you to see this kind of bigger so you can see this reference again. So he talks about, that they were coming up against the Assyrian troops and my royal host, which I had stationed in Egypt. So in Kemet. So they were trying to come up against them. And basically, when I found out about this, I sent the orders. My troops that were in place, that were supposed to be keeping things in charge, were now going to take over. You guys are going to turn your back on them. You're going to turn your back on your oath. So when he heard of these matters, he got together his army. He gave his army very specific orders. And he talks about how these people were basically, defying their oath against God. And they took them and they bound them hand and foot. That they put their hands and their feet in fetters of iron. Like I said, they were using iron in a lot of different ways for warfare in Assyria. And he basically said, they took them and they killed them. They slaughtered a whole lot of people. They took their bodies and they put them on poles. He talks about that not anybody that was associated with wanting to bar back up and to partner back up with Taharqa against the Assyrians were going to be killed. They killed them. So they essentially took them all. They people that were in various areas, they took them all and they were against the great gods, if you will, that they struck down this evil plot. They struck them down with a sword, as you can see right there. They struck them down with a sword, great and small. Not a man among them escaped. And then they began to say, in addition to that their bodies, they hung them on stakes. That they put their bodies, they hung them on stakes, and they stripped off their skin and covered the city walls with them. Stop for a second. This is the Assyrian Empire. They took these people who they considered were traitors, who were trying to bar back up and partner back up with King Taharqa because they did not want to be, because they liked King Taharqa. They wanted to be rulers together and to share the land with King Taharqa, make him in charge and put their lands together. And they wanted to be against the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians took them and killed them, skinned them apparently alive. I read alive, and then put their bodies on the walls of the city, the cities where they lived. And then put some of their bodies and put them on poles and stakes and put them around the area. Now, this is not the Roman army. This is before the Roman army. This is not the Roman army or Vlad the Impaler or all these things you hear. This is the Syrian army in the 7th century BC, 660, 669 BC, doing these incredible, skinning people alive and hanging their bodies on the walls outside the city. This is how they became an empire, but if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. It doesn't just happen. If you live by it, you die by it. So he wouldn't live very long after that. Yeah, it's disgusting that they would do, but that's how they rolled. That's how they wrote that. It's disgusting, but that's what they did. And I know a lot of people say, and I'm just making this comment. A lot of people say nuclear war. There are a lot of things we don't need. There are a lot of weapons we don't need. And I'm not for war or nuclear, that type of thing. But the truth is that if we didn't have ways to protect ourselves, there is somebody else out there. There's somebody out there who will use these things. There's somebody out there like the Assyrian army who would use nuclear power to probably kill a lot of people and just take over if there wasn't a deterrent. If there wasn't a situation where they were like, people would probably, I'm not for a nuclear war. I'm just saying, when you look at history and you read it, there are people who did very bad, disgusting things when they got weapons or an army or any type of advantage. They did disgusting things to get themselves in power. And the Assyrians were one of them. They did it, and people would probably do it again. So we'd have to be ready to stop them if they're going to do that. And so it's very interesting here. So he talks about, that, they basically skinned these people alive. They put them on the wall of ancient Kemet. And so you imagine what that revolt looked like, that desire to want to partner back up, bring back up Taharqa. That was kind of killed. They killed a lot of people. They kind of quashed that. And then what happened was they then took the leaders, if you will, those people who planned these evil acts against Assyria, and they brought them before me, he says, alive to Nineveh. So these are all the people who are going to eventually become more of the 26th dynasty. These are all, but just in this part right here, the 26th dynasty isn't the only ruling class and the only ruling family in Kemet, in the northern part of Kemet, this time under Assyria. They placed a lot of people there. There wasn't just them, and that was part of their way of kind of dividing up the power, dividing conquer. They had a lot of people, but when these people joined with Taharqa and sided with Taharqa, he was going to kill them. So what he did was, and he talks right here, and this tells you how the 26th dynasty got birthed right here. It tells you right here. He said, they brought them all to me alive. Those people who planned these evil acts against the armies of Assyria. They would not attack the armies. They brought them to me alive to Nineveh. And I had mercy on Necho. And Necho is one of the early founders, if you will, one of the early people of the 26th dynasty who I showed you earlier. He's one of the founding people. I had mercy on him, and I spared his life. And I laid an oath on him, more drastic than the former one upon him. I clothed him with splendid things and brightly colored garments, and laid upon his neck a golden chain and an emblem of his royalty. I put rings of gold upon his fingers and gave him an iron dagger, and I set in gold with my name written in it. You start to see he's giving Necho, the person who would help to really start and kick off the 26th dynasty. He's giving them gold. He's given them all kinds of luxury. He's given them, an iron dagger with his name on it. He makes them swear the oath, right? So there are these oaths, as I mentioned, when the Syrian people would take over an area and they put somebody in charge, you had to say an oath. And it wasn't just to the king, you were saying it to their gods. And if you broke this oath, you were breaking it with the understanding that they would cut out your tongue or skin you or kill you in some horrible way. And they meant it. And they did it a lot of times if they could. So here Necho is basically, what does he do? When I first read this and started thinking about it, I know a lot of people would talk about the 26th dynasty as being like the puppets of Assyria, but I didn't know this backstory. And maybe they don't, maybe they do, maybe they don't. This backstory, here's Necho being a part of a group that was siding with Taharqa, most likely, and wanted to be on Taharqa's side and did not want to be a part of the Assyrian army, in a situation where the people around him are being skinned alive and killed and hung up on walls and their bodies put on poles. And he's brought back to Assyria with a group of other rulers there in the northern part of Kemet. And he is told, you know what, I like you. I like you. Go ahead and swear an oath. And this time, this oath is going to be more binding than the one I had you swear before, and all these other people swear it before me. And then, when you do that, we're gonna be partners, you and I. And I'm going to give you a larger part. I'm going to make you control more of that part of ancient Kemet. I'm going to put you in charge. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give you and your son. Yeah, I'm going to give you and your son some resources and some land to rule. And you and I are going to be partners. We're going to be boys, so to speak. And Necho, what can he say? I mean, probably all the other people who were with him, who were rulers that were brought back alive, did not leave alive. But Necho did. And his family did. So as you start to think about it, you start to see that the 26th dynasty was born out of a whole warring faction that was taking place there in northern Kemet at this point in time as the Assyrian army became more powerful. I mean, that's how it was born. And it wasn't necessarily that they necessarily wanted to be with the Assyrian army, or they wanted to stay, or the people in northern Kemet wanted to be there. They wanted to, according to documents, partner back up with King Taharqa and not be two lands and fight against the Assyrian army. The Assyrian army just beat them and just brutalized them. And what happens then, as I mentioned, when you live by the sword, you die by the sword. So shortly after this whole interaction in Kemet, where the Assyrian king puts Necho in charge, and the 26th dynasty is firmly rooted now after all these people have been killed and all the usurpers have been killed. He dies. Assurbanipal dies. A lot of people in the Assyrian army, a lot of the rulers were either killed or died suddenly because they were fighting all the time. They were a warring nation. So you had coups that took place. You had people fighting battles. And so he died shortly thereafter that. And then as you move farther and farther along, the Assyrian army empire starts to weaken. And the 26th dynasty that was now in charge and had the backing of the Assyrian army, but the Assyrian army is becoming weaker and weaker, it's still becoming stronger. And one of the things they do, and I'd love to hear your comments on it. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but this gives you the background around it. One of the things they do, the 26th dynasty, is as the Assyrian army weakens, and as they start to get more powerful because they're now in charge, they start to conscript and bring into ancient Kemet additional people to serve in their armies. And remember, the Kushite people they're still in Nubia. They're still in charge of Nubia. They're still in charge in the south, and they're still very powerful. And one of the kings of the 26th dynasty actually goes and attacks Napata, actually goes into Kush and attacks Kush, maybe because of beefs with the Assyrian army, or maybe because they were trying to be loyal to the Assyrian army. I don't know, but they do attack, and there is some evidence of that. And so you find now the 26th dynasty, they really can't call on Kush. Kush is still a powerhouse. Kush is still a strong friend and maybe a foe now because they were against the Assyrians in the southern part. The 26th dynasty starts to call on people from Greece, from what is today Asia Minor and Turkey, from Phoenicia along the coast of the Mediterranean, right there where today is Palestine. They start to bring people from those areas into the delta area of ancient Kemet and put them in their army. So you find not only do the people in the 26th dynasty have Kemetic people in the army, but they have Greek people in the army, mercenaries, right? Phoenician people from what is today modern day Turkey. And that begins to populate part of the Northern Delta. Now, the Northern Delta have been populated in different ways at various points in time throughout Kemet's history. So it's not just literally for thousands of years. But this point in time is an important part because, Greece is not powerful yet. This is before Socrates. This is before Herodotus. This is before Thales. This is before all these people that you hear about in terms of Greek philosophy. This begins by most people's assessments and most people's standard, the beginnings of what would be the foundations laying the seed for what would become Greek mathematics and Greek philosophy. They're learning it in Kemet, and they learn it. It begins to really blossom under the 26th dynasty when people like Amasis begin to, even before him, begin to take Greek people and Greek mercenaries, bring them into ancient Kemet along with Phoenician and Turkish people, what will become Turkey as well, and they set up places for them. And Amasis goes a farther. He goes and he sets up, or just before him it was set up, an area called Necratis. And this Necratis, you can look it up. I've talked about this before. I can put a link down below. He sets up a city. And in his city, in Necratis, he's one of the people who set it up. He talks about really there being a city where it's really a city focused on merchants and it's focused on trade along the Mediterranean corridor, if you will. And he makes this one particular city be a city that's full of Greek people. And he really kind of interacts with the Greeks. He's using them as mercenaries. He's using them as merchants. And he lets the city be an area where they can kind of have to themselves. There are other areas where Greek people are in the northern delta and ancient Kemet. But Necratis is one of the areas that they have kind of almost exclusive of themselves, almost kind of set aside, even though there were other people there. They weren't the only people. They just had a special designation for that area, and they were allowed to be there. And it was also said, and Herodotus talks about there being a situation where, I believe it was in book 2 of Herodotus, and I've talked about this before, where if you were a trader coming to ancient Kemet and you came to an area in the northern part where the Mediterranean is, and you came to an area other than the Necratis, they would actually make you get out your boat. They would stop you if you were a merchant. They would make you swear that you came by mistake. So if you came to another city, you were supposed to know that Necratis is where you're supposed to come to. You had to swear that you did this by mistake, and then you had to get in a boat and go to Necratis and sell your stuff there, or have that be the area where you're going to unload your stuff. If you didn't do that, well, you were going to be in trouble. You'd be in trouble. And so even if you couldn't go because there were some challenges with the wind or something, natural disaster where you couldn't make it to Necratis by boat, you had to get out and carry your stuff. You had to get out and go, because Necratis was the area that was going to be the center for mercantilism and merchants. And that's what's talked about, Amasis talks about, and that's what Herodotus talks about in his histories, that specific thing. And that happens under the 26th dynasty. So you start to see the Greek area of Necratis becoming a confluent for trade and interaction coming from Kemet. So when you see people that later on came to ancient Kemet, like Pythagoras and people like that, and they studied, know that a lot of people believe, a lot of the archaeological evidence points to, it was during this time that the seeds for that were set up. And it was because there was merchant and trade activity going back and forth between Kemet and Greece and this whole area around the Mediterranean, that was allowed for philosophy and areas and things to change and to be shared, and for people to come from one place to another and begin to set up camp. So this is long. This is hundreds of years before Alexander the Great. He doesn't take over ancient Kemet yet. This is not him. This is hundreds of years before that. This is set up in the 26th dynasty. So it's a very interesting thing. And I think that really I believe that begins the foundations for where Greek becomes more of an interaction with ancient Kemet, has more of a foothold, and will eventually begin to set up a foothold to the point where its king would feel comfortable enough to come and take it over when they're fighting the Persians later on. So I just wanted to share that. God bless you. I hope all is well. Please put your comments down below. Please tell somebody about this and share it, and I'll talk to you soon.